welcome to episode 23 of the Mini Sculpting Super Show. I'm your host, Tom Mason, and today's topic is maybe a little weird. Today we're going to talk about sculpting toenails, but that's kind of a very quick, frankly, it's a very quick and easy thing to teach. So I decided to expand on this topic that was kind of a little bit of a joke. I actually didn't, it's voted on by the patrons, so they chose it and asked for me to do this. But I put it out there as kind of a joke. I didn't expect anybody to pick it, but it got selected, so here we are doing it. But it's very fun. It was neat to be able to do this here. Had a little fun with it. And yeah, so I'm excited to show you how to sculpt toenails, but not just that, how to approach the foot as a whole. Give you some tips and tricks for that. I'd like to say a huge thank you to my patrons who help support the show, and to my sponsor, Sculpting Toys, at sculptingtoenails.com. Head on over there, check it out, and enter the promo code TMSSS17, gotta remember the 17, and you'll get 10% off your order at checkout. Alright, let's get into the tutorial. Now, I know technically this video is about sculpting toenails, but I just thought that'd be way too simple, way too short, way too easy of a tutorial, and so I decided to do a whole foot. So that's what I got started here. I just have a little bit of a wire, any wire would do for this, and I would normally never do it this way by itself, but this will be a great way to illustrate the general form and things you need to take into account when you're sculpting a foot, and then ultimately the toenails. Now on this little demo piece here, this is much larger than a regular miniature's foot, unless you're doing something like an ogre. This is probably closer to a 54 millimeter miniature. Yeah, it's probably about that size. Might be a little bigger, but close to that. But it'll be a lot easier for you to see the toenails. Also, while you can put toenails or fingernails on a miniature, a 28 millimeter miniature size, I don't ever do that. Sometimes if it's a big barefooted barbarian guy or something at that size, I might squeeze it in there just because it does look a little strange to have nothing there, but it's very tiny and ultimately you really don't notice it. So it's almost more of a self-gratification kind of thing and just proving your skill and that you can do it, rather than it actually needing to be there for the sake of the miniature. So what I did here, just for anybody that's new that hasn't been following my videos as much, I'm working with Greenstuff putty, and then I'm working with FIMO poly clay, FIMO Professional. So what I started with is I skinned the wire armature that I had with Greenstuff, and that's a self-curing, very sticky epoxy putty. And I just did a thin layer over everything, and what that does is that allows the FIMO to stick to the figure. If you put FIMO directly on the wire, it won't stick. It'll move around, squish around, and it's not a good bond, not a good hold, and it won't survive the mold making process. So by putting down that first layer of putty, it enables you to have a very sticky layer that the putty will adhere to, and things won't move around. So what I do is I lay that first layer on there of putty, and then I put a thin layer of FIMO on top, and that's my base. And once that's done, usually I let that cure, but you can go in and just continue to sculpt, but I usually try and let it cure just to make sure that the putty has set up, and it just helps make sure that nothing's going to push or move around and everything's going to be stable. Now once you get that base layer down, you're going to go and you're going to start to bulk up the main form of the foot. And I actually started that a little bit when I was putting the skinning layer down and making a very large, flat, reverse wedge kind of shape for the foot. So the first kind of major element I start by putting on the foot is the top. Oh man. So you're gonna find out something about me. I don't know a lot of my anatomical terms, but I put the top of the foot on, you know, where it comes out from the toes up into the shin bones, that sort of thing. I put a nice blob of putty there. Then I like to put I like to start the ankles, and then a little blob on the back for the heel, and those kind of really set the main features of the foot right away. Your toes are your smallest, flattest area, and this gets all the, so you can kind of leave those a little bit till the end. Big tip for the ankles. So this is a right foot. Now, a lot of times people will just skip over ankles even, but I like to put them in. Sometimes you can get away with it on the smaller miniatures, especially if a character's wearing boots or shoes, you know, things that kind of hide and obscure it. But the important thing about ankles too is they are not parallel. They're not straight across from each other. They're not in line. They actually slope at different angles. So if you look here, you can see so on your foot, the outer ankle is lower and the inner ankle is higher. So whenever you're doing those, make sure you just offset them a bit like that. And actually, interesting enough, if you look at the musculature of your calf, if we were to have done a full leg, the calf muscle actually bulges in the opposite direction. So the outside of the calf is higher and the inside of the calf is lower. So basically the inside is closer together, ankle and calf, and the outside is farther away. And it creates a nice little flow when you realize this and you do it right as you're sculpting. That really helps, you know, well, your anatomy's correct, which is always good, and but it actually creates a nice flow in your miniature when you see those offset and changing shape dynamics. I also went ahead and added some putty for the toes there, and I'll constantly go back as you watch and refine the shape. Right now I'm just kind of blending everything together, so, but it's always good to just get the material, whether you're working with FIMO, another poly clay, or putty. It's always good to just get the material down to see the general shapes and proportions and how they all work together. Same thing here as it would be with anything else in sculpting. And then you just have to go back in once you've got most of that done and just blend things together. So, you know, as I realized after I put the toes on, because I wanted this guy to have really large and kind of gnarly toes, because I'm going to be showing you how to sculpt toenails, and I wanted to make sure that it was a little larger on this video so it'd be easier to see. And so I had to add in a little more to the top of the foot and play with the ankles a little more, just to make sure that all of that stood out and looked like it went together correctly. I'm just using my basic kind of sculpting tools on this as well. I've got my large burnisher, which is a wax 5. I've got I don't think I've used it yet, but I will. Well, there it is right there. The small burnishing tool, which is just a very small little spoon-shaped tool that gets into tinier detailing areas. And that's a color shaper. That's the size 0 extra firm flat chisel, and that's the one color shaper I use more than any other. It's a great little tool. I will also end up using a scalpel in this to cut in the toes and the toenails, but you'll see that in a little bit. Just keep refining and smoothing. At this point, you should have the basic form figured out, done, and it's all about just smoothing things out, getting things nice, because you always want to make sure that your form is completely worked out and everything is smooth and nice before you cut in details. It's always a lot, because if you have some putty that wasn't fully blended and you start cutting in the toe details or the toenail details and you didn't have everything fully blended, well, it's much harder to blend in the putty when you have tiny details. You got to get a much smaller tool. It's easier to bump and distort. And so just take a little bit of time, make sure you have everything smoothed out and put together nice and in the main form that you want. And then we'll move on to making the toes. Now that the foot's all bulked up, we can begin sculpting the toes. So I'm just doing a quick little refinement here of the overall shape. But what you need to do here to begin with is take your scalpel or an X-Acto knife and start cutting in the toes. And I like to start by doing the large toe, the big toe, the inner toe. And that's because it's typically going to be your largest. You know, toes aren't as uniform as fingers. Fingers tend to be relatively the same size, but with toes, obviously your big toe is the biggest. So you cut that in first, and then you cut in the other lines to form the rest of them. Now, a lot of times it can be hard to tell or to put enough material when you're bulking up the foot to actually accentuate the toes properly. So and since this is kind of like a giant's foot or an ogre's foot, I decided to add some more clay onto the big toe just to really make sure it came across as big and large and didn't slope down and look diminutive or anything like that. So just that's okay if you end up doing that, but you can do that, and you can do a little bit of smoothing to kind of blend that back in. That works totally fine. Okay, now what you see me doing here is I took a pin tool. So when you cut in the toe, it just makes a very harsh line, which is good at showing off the shape of the toes, but when you press in with the needle tool like you just saw, that's what gives it this neat little dimple or divot in the crease of where the toes meet. And it just makes it look a lot more natural. And you can add in a little bit more to the top of the foot just to kind of further accentuate the bones that are underneath the skin. It's just a neat little detail that helps bring that out. And you can do that on 28mm miniatures, but again, since this foot is much larger than that, it's very important to, throw in extra little details like that. Just need to bulk the toe up a little more still to get it to just the right size. And there we go. It's looking pretty good. Just do a little more refinement. But then, we'll be ready to sculpt the toenails. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for, how to sculpt the toenail. I know it's been a long road, but I couldn't do a video just on toenails. And as you'll see, because they're really easy to sculpt. It's actually a lot like sculpting the eyes, where they seem really complicated and they can be tricky, but you just need basically to do 4 little lines. So on this, with the toe, I like to you just make 4 little cuts with your X-Acto blade or your scalpel. You do 2 on the side, 1 in the back, which I try and round that a little bit because you don't want to just make a square shape with the toenail. It looks unnatural. You want it to be a little more rounded up near the quick. And then 1 on the front. And with that one, you also want to try and lift it just a touch because the nail, there's a space between the nail and the skin of the finger, and it just kind of accentuates the shape of the nail and accents that. So once you've done that, you just go down the line and do the same thing to all of them. Obviously, the smaller the toe, the smaller the toenail. So just use your judgment there. And then I'm just going back in with the small burnisher just to kind of help refine the rounded shape at the back of the nail, and to also kind of lift up and put a little extra divot in the front of the toenail. And there you go. That's how you sculpt toenails. It's really that simple. Now I'm just kind of finishing off this little element, making it a complete sculpt. I figured, hey, if I'm sculpting this foot, where did this foot come from? Well, probably from a giant or an ogre that got broken off or cut off, and so there's going to be a bone sticking out. So that's what I'm doing as you see me finishing up this sculpture. My kids thought it was kind of weird, but I got a kick out of it. Well, that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching the Mini Sculpting Super Show. Please feel free to leave a comment down below. I read them all and try and respond to every single one. Really appreciate them. If you'd like to support the show, head on over to Patreon and join the community there. And this was actually, as I said, was voted on by the patrons. This wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for them. So if you have a topic you'd like, go head on over there and you'll be able to vote and suggest topics as well. Well, thank you so much for watching, and keep sculpting.